So we'll look at my deck first, which got second place. So my deck is a mill deck. My deck is based on decking out my opponent. I do almost no damage. That's not the goal. It's very easy to deck out your opponents in Monster Rancher battle cards because you draw 5 cards every time. So this is my side deck. We'll take a look at the side deck later. It doesn't matter as much. Okay, so these are all the breeder cards. Breeder cards in Monster Rancher battle card are cards that you can use at any point in your turn. You don't need a specific monster to use them. These are mostly environment cards. So these are mostly things I throw in the middle to control the game. The big ones are Awe and Loctite. Awe increases 1 guts to use a card. So basically, this stops quick aggression because all of these cards that are normally free now cost 1. Everything that now costs 1 is literally doubled in value. It's not so good against decks that spend a lot of guts to attack a single time, because if you're already spending 5 guts to like get a 1-hit kill, spending 6 guts instead of 5 guts is a much less prohibitive cost than spending 2 3 times in a turn when you would normally spend 1 3 times in a turn. You know, like it's a big difference between double and like an additional 1 cost. So it's not as good against heavy decks, but it's very good against quick aggression like Mochi decks, Pixie, Hair, stuff like that. And then Loctite is basically, there is a card that's literally the opposite of Loctite, but this functionally is the same thing. This basically stops you from attacking at all if you do more than 4 or more damage. So this forces you to only use light attacks. So this is if I was fighting a Durahand deck or something like that, I would play Loctite and stop them from doing anything. Prey is probably the strongest card in the game. Prey is a 0-cost card that stops breeder cards from working. As you can see, a lot of breeder cards are very expensive. Like spending 3 guts to not do any damage is kind of a big deal. Spending 4 guts to not do any damage is a really big deal. This is the most powerful card in the game because environment control is extremely powerful and you can just stop it for free. So we limited it to 2. So I got 2 in my deck. Cool Judge is basically, it's a get out of jail card. It removes whatever environment cards on the field and lets you draw one. That has no other effect. It doesn't affect the field in any way. It's just like, I don't want to play with Awe on the field, so I'll play Cool Judge to get rid of it. Dodge is very good for my deck because my cards don't have cheap ways to dodge. Dodge is great because I'm not planning on attacking, and if I've only got like 2 guts saved up, or even if I have like 4 guts saved up, if I can just dodge, like not get hit, I'll totally spend it. Confusion makes it so you have to discard 2 cards from top of your deck before you draw at the beginning of every single turn. It happens to both players, but it does affect your opponent first. So because it affects your opponent first, it effectively mills 2 cards at the absolute worst. Say they get rid of it immediately with Cool Judge. Okay, not a big deal. It doesn't affect you. You spent 4 cards and 4 guts to like get rid of basically 3 cards because Cool Judge also draws 1. Which is a little expensive, but honestly not that bad. And at best, it completely shuts down aggressive decks because they're playing so many cards that they're basically put on a clock. And say they play 2 cards a turn, or they gut 2 cards a turn, all of a sudden, you're now going through their deck at twice the speed, which is kind of crazy. And then Busy Time works really well with Confusion because it just puts all of your guts back in your deck. So say you have 10 guts saved up, you play Busy Time, they all go back in your deck, and you get to repeat this cycle until your opponent is decked out. I have 1 copy of Retreat, which is stop stuff like Pedal Wind and Twiddling and shit like that hits all your opponents at the same time. For 1 guts, you get to dodge that for free. I only have 1 in my deck because it's usually not very good. Like, you need to know your opponent has that, right? So in my side deck over here, I've got 2 more copies of it in case I'm playing against an AoE deck or something like that. And then Fainted is just a brutally powerful card. Spend 5 guts, both players' guts go to 0. There is no counterplay to it. Attacks that do Withering, they can be blocked, they can be dodged, you can use Persistence to stop it. Special cards can't be defended against though, and this is a special card. This is not a power attack or an intelligence attack, it is a special attack. You can't defend against special attacks. So you literally can just, at any point, reduce your opponent's guts to 0. Very, very powerful, especially in this deck. That's the main gist of it, and then here you'll see I have some defense cards for Usaba. We'll look at side roll first. Dodges any attack that uses 2 or more guts, which means that Usaba is actually prone to getting chipped out. Attacks that do 2 damage for 1 cost, stuff like that, can't really do anything about it. That's just an issue with Suezo in general. And then front roll costs a little bit more, but it's the same effect except for cards that use 1 or more guts. So all of a sudden, things that cost 1 or 2 damage or whatever, front roll can dodge them. It's usually a net loss in guts, but it's good if it keeps the monster alive because it forces your opponent to attack again. And then my only real attack cards in the deck. So Power of Sun is super important plant card, one of the most powerful cards in the game. It just makes any plant tech cost 2 less. So you can do stuff like Toxic Pollen on turn 1 or turn 2. Say you only have 2 discards because you went first, your opponent dumps their whole hand, you get to do 2 damage, and then you can dump your hand for 3 guts without fear of reprisal because they have no guts left. That's really strong. Toxic Nectar is the same sort of thing, except it leaves you with 1 gut, so that's even better. Lifesteal is a very niche pick. It's only really usable with Power of Sun. 4 costs 3 damage, that steals 3 life. That's really good for Usaba because, as I was talking about earlier, it's really hard for Usaba to deal with chip damage. Lifesteal obviously doesn't recover a lot of health, but it is pretty good against, chip damage. They can spend 2 or 3 cards getting you down to by like 3 or 4 health, and then you just take it back with Lifesteal. Jab is just a basic vanilla 2 damage 1 cost. Just for like closing out monsters. If there's like a guy close to death, you just swing, kill him. Not too bad. Take the Hit is the plant defense card I run. I only run Take the Hit, I don't run Leap 0. It just takes away 2 damage. It's a block card, it's not a dodge, so stuff that says this won't be dodged is not affected by Take the Hit. Death Vial is another Withering card. Just gets rid of all your opponent's guts. Costs 5 though, it's very expensive. I don't think I used it a single time. Might be worth removing it. It's kind of a nice tech pick, but like I don't think it's the best card in the game or anything. Evil Spirit is good in theory, but again, I think it's better in offensive decks than it is in defensive decks. Like the opponent's breeder's cards, choose 1 and discard 1 of his cards. This is good if you get to discard defense cards. Not so great if your opponent is going hyper offense, because if you just discard their card, there's a good chance whatever they draw is also going to fuck you up. So it's not the best thing in the world. I might get rid of it if I keep running this deck. Death Scythes is the play though. Death Scythes is one of the linchpins of this deck. It actually has a massive misprint on it. Discard top 3 cards from the top of your opponent's deck. That sounds pretty good. But it's actually better than that. It's actually discard 3 cards from their hand. So if they're holding on to like 2 attacking cards and a defense card or whatever, and they're like, okay, this is really good, I'm going to set up a combo or I'm going to set up a play of some sort, you can just get rid of all 3 of them. It does mean that more often than not, you're using it when they have less than 3 cards in hand, so you don't get full value, as you would if you were just discarding off the top of the deck, but I think it's better in general regardless. And then for Joker defense cards, I have a lot, because my goal is keeping him alive as long as possible, to use these things, and maybe use these things, and maybe use these things. Death Scythe, or Scythe Guard, is just like Moshi's roll, except it costs 2. Pretty fucking expensive for what it does, but I usually have the guts for it. This is a big part of why Joker doesn't work well as an aggressive card, is his defense cards are way too expensive, and he's too fragile, so he doesn't stay in the game for long, and he just like instantly dies. Or you end up spending a ton of guts keeping him alive, which also is not good for offense. And then Premonition is the same thing as Side Roll, except it costs 2. So also kind of dubious in his defense. It's easy to chip him down, but Scythe Guard does a lot to stop that. It's just sometimes it's not in your favor cost-wise. So this is the deck I ran. As you can see, a lot of environment control. My entire game plan is built around getting whatever I need on the field and stopping my opponent from playing. That's a big part of this game, honestly, is it's not so much trying to get your game plan in order. It's much harder to set up a combo for yourself than it is to just stop your opponent from being able to do what they want to do. It's a little bit counterintuitive if you played a lot of MTG or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever, and you're like, okay, I got all my combo pieces, I'm going to make this work. Your hand is so small. Most combos are very, very inefficient or very inconsistent, and it's a thing that'll only happen 1 every 10 games or something like that. It's much easier to just be like, okay, whatever my opponent wants to do, what if I just stop them from doing a thing, and I can still like kind of function under whatever setup I put down. That's what this is about. Confusion, obviously not a great card for me. As you can see, it's a very expensive deck, so I want to kind of dump cards occasionally. But if it hurts my opponent more than it hurts me, that's a good idea. Same thing. Having to spend 3 guts to use Scythe Guard is a huge pain in the ass, but You know, if they're running a pixie deck that has a bunch of 0 and 1 cost cards, all of a sudden Awe is very good for me because it's bad for my opponent. Nice Fight is the literal opposite of Loctite. If you do 3 or less damage, Power Intelligence moves are not available. Obviously, this fucks up my entire offensive game plan. Can't do any Withering now. Can't do any chip damage. Can't heal any life with Lifesteal. But if my opponent is like Mochi or Plant or Pixie or something, I'll just win by defense if I put Nice Fight up. So even though it kind of hurts me, it hurts my opponent more. Nice Fight, based on what's in my deck, doesn't make sense to have it as a main deck card. But if my opponent is like a very quick aggression deck with like really cheap attacks, Nice Fight makes a lot of sense. And I've literally never, ever seen anyone else use Tough Defense. I've never seen it used, but I thought it might be kind of useful, and it was kind of useful. So that's my deck. This is the deck that came second. I'm pretty happy with it. I probably won't run it again though, or maybe I'll try to come up with something completely new.